Okay, this video is my three main academic heroes, and the first one is Isaac Newton, and here he is at the cottage in Woolsthorpe in 1665, and this is called the Annus Mirabilis, when he had his miracle year, and he figured out gravity, he figured out some of the fundamental laws of physics and optics. And why is Isaac Newton such a great hero to me? Because he did these things by himself. He was, just graduated from Oxford, and then there was a plague that year, so he went out to his cottage and just studied by himself because he wanted to figure things out. I like the rural environment where you can really just think. You need time to just be alone and to think. This is the symbolism of the apple fell to the ground, and then he realized something about gravity, and that was popularized by Voltaire. I have mixed feelings about Voltaire. He did a lot of good things, but he did a lot of bad things too. So anyways, though, the idea that an individual who just sits down and thinks can make tremendous discoveries, I really admire that, and I like that about him. And also, I had the same feeling when we had the recent plague, as you well know, like let's say around 2020, 2021. I wanted to publish 6 books that year, and all I did was isolate myself. No email, no cell phone, no social media, nothing. All I did was write, and I wrote 6 books in 1 year, and in my mind's eye, I was trying to be like Isaac Newton. Okay, and the other examples of that, here is a photograph of Watson and Crick. And the reason I show you Watson and Crick is because they figured out the structure of the DNA double helix just by studying the work of other scientists. What's not widely realized is there's tons of good papers out there written by PhDs who have a very high knowledge and a narrow focus, but they can't put it all together. This is a very common thing. So I admired the way these two guys had figured out the structure of the DNA helix just by studying the work of other scientists, really. Okay, here's a nice quote from Isaac Newton. A student asked him, how did you figure out the law of gravity? And he said, by thinking about it all the time. And that's what you have to do. You have to really think a lot and then start reading paper after paper. If you're lucky, you'll have people who you can talk to. And here again is the idea of silos. And this is like these PhDs doing research. They'll do excellent research in a narrow area of their own, but they just don't know enough to put it together with other fields. And you have to read typically in multiple fields to make many new discoveries. Okay, now here is Thomas Aquinas, hero number 2. What I love about Thomas Aquinas is he said that you have to have faith to go with knowledge. They go together. Faith and reason go together. He's the most famous person ever for showing that faith and reason have to go together. And they do, because if you don't have that moral foundation of, like St. Augustine had said, right is right. He said, wrong is wrong, even if everyone is doing it. Right is right, even if no one is doing it. And you need to have that. Otherwise, you just end up with, most modern science, I wouldn't even call it science. It's just advertising. I mean, they own, the big companies own the journals, they own the scientists, and they produce fake stuff to promote their product, okay? Whereas this Aquinas was a heroic guy. And here's some other paintings of Aquinas, Here he is with his books, the church, and the great doctor scholar of the church. All right, and then I'm going to show you a painting of Aquinas that I love. Here's a painting of Aquinas where he had a vision of Christ, and he's like, I tried. I wish I could have done better. And Christ's like, you did okay. In the sense that, I think to be a great scholar, it helps. I answer to Christ. So I don't care what the high-fat phonies think. I don't care what conventional medicine thinks. I care about doing what's right, in my view of Christianity and Christ. Because that's what you have to have. Because if you don't, look at all these guys. I've shown you the videos. They're smart guys, and I think they're basically good guys. They want to be, but they all end up selling out because you have to sell out almost if you're going to do it for money. And I'm lucky that I just do nutrition and health on the internet as a hobby. I don't make any money from it. And that's, I make my money from conventional medicine. I would love to do this full time, but there's just almost no money in it. But it's the right thing to do. So anyways, Thomas Aquinas is born. And that's the only thing that could save healthcare is that it becomes sort of Bible-based with Christian ethics. And it doesn't want to do that. Of course it doesn't want to do it. Imagine you're a billionaire making $1 billion a year. Do you want to change to a more ethical, high-quality system that makes you less money? No way. They want their money. And they're going to get their money, and they control the system, so it's not going to change. Okay, and of course the work of Aquinas showing that Aristotle was compatible and even went well with the church, the Catholic Church, is why the Catholic Church then had the Renaissance and developed the modern scientific method. And here, of course, is Aristotle, the biologist, pointing down to the ground saying we must look at reality here on earth to be practical. And here's Plato pointing up to the sky, the idea of the perfect forms. Here's Socrates discussing things with some student. There's Alcibiades right there. There's Michelangelo. There's Diogenes on the stairs. I love all this stuff. And this is also a unification of the ideas of Greek philosophy and scholarship with Roman architecture, for example. Okay, and this is what leads to magnificent stuff when people tell the truth and they work towards trying to make things as good as possible for everyone. Okay, and then, I've had the nickname, one of my nicknames is the medical monk, and that's a perfect nickname for my site, the medical monk. I actually think it's the best one, even though Bad Boy of Veganism and some of the other fun ones, Spartan Vegan, they're all good, and those seem to resonate more with the public. But medical monk is, I'm telling you, you cannot fix medicine unless you respect the individual and you say, man is created in the image of God, therefore he's part divine as well as part beast, and we will do right by him. Because unless we agree to do right by him as an individual, that the individual is the most important minority, as Ayn Rand has said. The smallest minority is individual, and if you grant individual rights, you grant all other rights. And as Christ said, that which you do to the least of my brethren, you do unto me. Because currently, conventional medicine sells amphetamines to children, okay? It's drug dealing, poisoning children with amphetamines. That's insane. And nobody really stands up for these kids. The teachers are, too stupid to say anything, and the doctors are too dishonest to say anything. And so everybody backs off. Meanwhile, the Ivy League and the famous medical centers are saying, yeah, sell the kids more drugs, sell them bipolar meds, sell them antidepressants. It's a total, evil thing that's happening. So you have to have a moral foundation. Otherwise, everything just goes to money. And that's why it makes itself into a joke. Oh, actually, I think I had something else on here. Yeah, I had one other thing I wanted to show on this slide. Let me scoot over here. Here is Thomas Aquinas preaching during a tempest to the people. And I'm telling you, that's a little bit like what we're going through right now, don't you think? And I'll show a painting that I think captures that. Here's the painting by Augustus Schenk of, the sheep in a storm. And again, this is what we see. The only thing that could save the sheep is to rally to the cross, but the sheep are so stupid, they probably won't do it. And, the wolves don't want them to rally to the cross because the wolves are smart. They know that's the only thing that could save the stupid sheep. The sheep have a couple dogs to protect them for a little while, but the dogs aren't going to do much. They're either going to rally to the cross and, be a group and unify and help each other and be nice, or they're screwed, okay? And, right now it's looking like they're probably screwed. Hopefully not, but that's the only thing that could save them. And people tell you otherwise, they think they don't need it, but they're stupid, okay? I mean, if you study history, if you really studied, Russia in the 1900s, okay? This is pretty obvious. Study France in the 1700s. It's obvious. Okay, here's a great quote I like by Ayn Rand. Now we're going to talk about Aristotle, my third academic hero. Ayn Rand here, and Ayn Rand was brilliant. Ayn Rand is the smartest woman who ever lived. She said, everything that makes us civilized beings, every rational value that we possess, is the result of Aristotle's influence. Aristotle may be regarded as the cultural barometer of Western history. Whenever his influence dominated the scene, it paved the way for one of history's brilliant eras. Whenever it fell, so did mankind. Yes, it was Aquinas and his showing that Aristotle's reasoning was compatible with the church and went together, and they sort of amplified each other, is what led to the Renaissance and the modern scientific method as discovered by the Catholic Church. That's where it comes from, okay? Copernicus, Catholic, okay? All right, anyways, and then, Christianity in general then adopted it, like the Protestants with Isaac Newton and whatnot, for example, okay? Aristotle. The highest activity of man is the pursuit of truth. We should study excellence to make us become excellent. Nowadays in the modern world, they hate excellence, okay? Excellence gets you in trouble, and it should be celebrated. Just like you celebrate a great athlete, great scholars should be appreciated, not hassled and scorned and censored, okay? And here's a nice quote by Aristotle. He said, the life of the intellect is the most pleasant and the best life, because the intellect is that which is unique about man. The pleasure of contemplation of truth is continuous and enduring. It does not wax and wane like the other pleasures. of all men, the philosopher is the most godlike. Therefore, philosophers are the best men. Now, that last one is kind of funny because whatever somebody does, they always think it's the most important thing. Just like, so Aristotle thinks philosophers are the best because he's a philosopher. Percy Bysshe Shelley said poets are the best because he's a poet. And whatever field, people tend to do that. So it's funny. Okay, another thing about smart men is they're often chumps for women, and I must admit I'm no exception. And this is the famous story of Aristotle and Phyllis. Here is Alexander the Great behind the tree watching Aristotle getting ridden like a horse by Phyllis. Phyllis had been the girlfriend of Alexander the Great, and all the Alexander's men came to Aristotle saying Aristotle is kind of whipped by Phyllis, and he's doing all kinds of stupid things that are bad for us, for the country, etc. Would you please talk to him? Aristotle thought they had made sense, so he talked to Alexander and told him to break up with Phyllis. Alexander dumped Phyllis. Phyllis heard about it. She was pissed off, so to get revenge on Aristotle, she sort of, flirted with him, and then she told Alexander to hide behind a tree, and then she told Aristotle to get down on his knees, and she rode him like a horse and spanked his bottom and pulled his hair. Here's another version of the painting there. And so men are often made fools of by women, and I must admit I'm no exception. We'll talk about that in some other video. Okay, here is one first painting here is, actually this is a painting of me by one of my kids, and I like it though because I love the whole Greek tradition. The ancient Greeks are the most fascinating of the ancient cultures. There's nothing even close. The ancient Greeks of Athens, let's say from about 500 to 300 BC, they're magnificent. As Percy Bysshe Shelley had said, the most interesting, amazing time ever in the history of mankind was the ancient Greeks from about 500 to 300 BC. It's extraordinary. If you want to study the greatness of the human intellect, study that time. You'll see there's more concentration of geniuses and magnificent work in that time. Most of what we consider Western civilization and what's good of Western civilization came out of that time, 500 to 300 BC in ancient Greece, especially in Athens. Okay, this right here is Aristotle, one of the many pictures of Aristotle. And Aristotle, what I love about him, he basically summarized the useful knowledge of the ancient world. I'm just going to show you a couple pictures of how my family kind of it reminds me of the Greek traditions. This was my grandfather, who was national champion bicycle rider in Ireland 9 times. My father, some of my father's family. And so that was real strong in my father's family, athletics and scholarship. My father was boxing champion and a doctor and all this stuff, and it was very motivating for me. Here's one of my grandfather's, championship medals with one of my uncles there. And I visited those guys while they were still alive, and they're a rather amazing story. And I was cut out of the same mold, student athlete of the year at Stanford University, real serious about athletics. Talked about that in other videos. I set the all-time school record for victories at Stanford. You could look this up yourself at gostanford.com for most victories in a year. As a wrestler, 39. Team captain, student athlete of the year, all that stuff. Here is Aristotle in the peripatetic school walking around with the students. And that's what they did. They would walk around and talk, and then they would go sit somewhere, and Aristotle would lecture, and they would take notes. A lot of Aristotle's books are really student notes, unfortunately. Plato did a much better job. Okay, so what I love about Aristotle is he tried to summarize the useful knowledge of his time and have it as correct, as well organized as possible, and correct any errors in it as best he could. Again, unfortunately, we mostly have student notes. Most of his own personal books got lost, sadly. Some of them were translated into Latin by Cicero and later by other scholars. Boethius helped to maintain the traditions of Aristotle, etc. Then the Irish monks did, like in Thomas Cahill's book, How the Irish Saved Civilization. But that's what I love about Aristotle, and I'll be honest with you, I think I'm a modern Aristotle, and I intentionally try to be a modern Aristotle. Oh, by the way, one thing I meant to show you, like going back to those pictures, what do I have in my background here? I have an Irish castle, kind of the ruins of an Irish castle, and I have that, as my background to kind of, because otherwise I got to block the light here. My new apartment otherwise I can't. The light would glare everything out. All right, so sorry about that. So next painting, this is more of Aristotle's school. So after they would walk around the students, they would then sit down and talk. And I actually think if somebody actually really cared about the truth, they should take people like me and just put us in institutions and let us study. Conventional medicine, I do it because I make the money. I'm grateful for the money, but this other stuff is so much more powerful, and I wish I could get accepted into some type of research institution and do that work. I just show you now, again, like how do I imitate Aristotle, and I do this all intentionally. Here's my family from Puerto Rico. My family from Puerto Rico is really smart. They're way smarter than my Irish family. My Irish family is much more bookish, though. That's a picture of my mother. When I wrote one of my books about quick grammatical Spanish, I studied language acquisition in some detail and wrote about that. This was my grandfather on my mother's side. He was considered the smartest man in Puerto Rico, fluent in 6 languages, able to do mathematics in his head, add up long columns of data. Anyways, he was a merchant marine, though, and he had a family in another island. And my grandmother, her mom, divorced him and booted him out, and he never came back. My mom actually hated him, even though. Anyways, here is my picture in med school, and I wrote the Medical Student's Guide to Top Board Scores. And so I sort of summarized everything I knew about how to crush medical school boards and how to prepare for that. And so what I'm saying is I spent a tremendous amount of time trying to figure out everything about academics and memorization. I wrote straight A at Stanford on to Harvard. This is the student version, good one for high school and college kids. This is a little more advanced version for grad students if they care, and older persons. This is the one, though, for a young person if they want to just do better in school. And then I summarized, because also I was worried about the collapse of Western civilization. I summarized the great quotes of the philosophers and history, the Greeks, the Romans, Renaissance, Romantics, and Recents in this Holy Grail of Wisdom Quotes book. So what I'm basically saying is I did what Aristotle did. Okay, I summarized literature, writing methods, public speaking methods, oratory, rhetoric, rhyme, rhetoric, and logic, all in this book, methods of rhyme and poetry. Because again, I wanted to, and I also kind of have this philosophy that all this stuff goes together. Some people say, oh, you got to concentrate only on science or only on one thing to be great, and I don't think that's true. I think, yeah, you got to mainly concentrate on one thing to learn it, but these other things are all complementary. They make it better. And then I summarize aesthetic Christianity with this book, Best Christian Art. That's actually my most popular book when I meet people in person. Everybody wants this thing. It's beautiful. Because university professors have basically made themselves stupid. Because they always feel they have to go by convention, they always ruin everything. Like when they show an art book, they waste all your time with fat female fertility goddesses that a child could make, cave paintings, and then they pretend modern art's the same as real art. So their art books always suck. And this is more than just painting. I also go through sculpture, architecture, literature, movies, etc. And so anyways, this is an aesthetically beautiful book. I can tell you, in person, people love this book. Oh, then this was just one quick slide to show you. I've written tons of other books besides all this stuff. I wrote a whole bunch of stuff. And actually, before I learned how to draw, I made books like A Tale of Two Tubs. That's my funniest book. My friends will just laugh. I have female doctors. They just look at me and they start laughing as soon as they think of this book. This book is really funny. I've been told by people it's the funniest medical book ever written, one of the funniest books they ever read in their life. A Tale of Two Toes and a Hot Tubs. Then I wrote Hot Topics in Nutrition. The reason why these have plain white covers is there's a trilogy, and I didn't have the ability to draw on a computer at that time. So I think they're very well written, but the lack of illustrations is the downside of those books. This book right here, How to Reduce the Risk of Cancer and Chronic Disease, is actually my most technical book. Again, it was written before I had the ability to draw on a computer. So the lack of illustrations is a little bit of a downer, but that's where I went into the most technical detail about things like Parkinson's disease and some other rare diseases, because I wanted to concentrate on it. So that was the best I could do at the time. And I wrote a whole bunch of other books. That's why I also say my YouTube channel, I have unlimited content for multiple years. I could easily make 3, 4, 5 new videos every single day if I had the time. The reason I don't is because I'm working so much. But I've got tons and tons. And I've written a whole bunch of other books besides these. And then I wanted to a couple more things to show you. So here is my book, The Medical Reformation. And this book, basically, I rewrote the internal medicine textbooks as well as some of their subspecialties. So that's, again, what I mean by Aristotle. I've gone through these books, cover to cover, the internal medicine books, and I've corrected the errors. And there's lots of errors. They're basically a joke. Okay, so this is correct information about internal medicine subspecialties, and the relationship of nutrition to health. And there's a lot of information on toxicology in here. Medical Reformation, Vegan Renaissance, Bible. Okay, if you only wanted to read one health book of mine, this would probably be the one to read if you're interested in the health of the body primarily. There is some brain stuff in here, but I got another book about the brain that's better. Okay, this was when I basically summarized everything about dementia, preventing that, raising IQ, academics, to increase IQ, from an increased IQ point of view. I wrote other books previously about how to, optimize IQ in a child, like when you're as a parent, Here I basically wrote oncology books, how to prevent cancer. Here is Food, Mood, and IQ. And this is my newest book, Food, Mood, and IQ, 100 Ways to be Happier and Smarter. And this is actually the best book ever written about the brain by far. There's nothing even remotely close to it. And what I did in this book was I rewrote psychology and psychiatry, because psychology and psychiatry are essentially totally stupid. And people say to me, oh, how could you be so arrogant? How could you say psychology and psychiatry are stupid? I can tell you because I know a lot about it. My father was a psychiatrist. And I'll also tell you in this book will shock you. You will freak out when you read this book. And I'm going to tell you things in here that I've kept secret for 40 years that I know about psychiatry from having grown up with a psychiatrist as a father. And it's rather shocking. Psychiatry is probably the worst field in medicine. Psychology is a joke. I mean, I'll explain why psychology is a joke in other lectures, and I have talked about it before. And I also go through a lot of stuff about neurology in here, and general preventive medicine, toxicology, because you have to know the brain's a lot more fussy than the rest of the body. Because a lot of these guys have done, fantastic work, like Dr. McDougall, Dr. Asselston, but their ultimate goal is to keep the arteries open in the heart. And that's great, okay? Caldwell Esselstyn is awesome at the heart. He's the best guy for cardiac prevention, and I love a lot of things Caldwell Esselstyn has done. But where these guys miss is they don't know almost anything about the brain, and the brain is much more fussy and complicated than is the heart. So if you want to optimize your health, you want to protect your brain, and I go into that in tremendous detail. I go through all the issues of food related to mood, related to mental illness, related to mood disorders, what's being done about mood disorders, what's real, what's BS, what's worth a try, what makes people happy, what makes people smarter, what makes the brain work, what helps get rid of anxiety, what improves sleep. One of the fastest ways to improve sleep is not have a computer. When I was moving because of the divorce recently, I didn't have the computer for about a week. And man, I'd go to bed early every night. I got nothing to do. I'd read a little bit and go to bed. So anyways, I think that's the last slide here. Let's see. Yep, that's it. Okay, well anyways, I hope that was helpful.